All right, so welcome to Hello World. This week we're going to be tackling React.js. You can go to react.js.org to kind of see their main page here. And React is, as you can see, a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. So it's a JavaScript library, meaning it's written completely in JavaScript. And it helps you build reactive user interfaces. So when you have a more complicated interactive UI, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, just writing those, just vanilla, all of those things, it doesn't scale necessarily very well. Building a really big site or just a site with lots of interactive elements, lots of things going on, doesn't necessarily always work the best just writing it in vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So React gives us it's a framework or more of a library that you can use to help you do some of these things more easily. It provides a lot of powerful abstractions, but there's also a lot of confusing points about it and different things like that. So one thing that's really great about React in particular is right now it's like the most popular front-end library for user interfaces. So the community support is really good. If you need like another library that's for something, from some various thing, like the other day I was trying to find a React library to display a chart, and like you just need to Google React charts, and someone has already built a plugin or a library for it. So that's something really awesome about React. Here's the application we're going to be building today. So if you guys remember, our weather app from a couple of weeks ago was pretty bare bones. And people really like building that. So this week we're going to be building kind of a revamped version of that. So you can kind of search, and you see there's that nice little indicator there, and it gives you all the options. Remember how before we were just plucking the top option off? Well, now you can kind of display the different options, and then you can pick a location, and then you kind of get the whole week instead of just the one day. And you also get this nice icon that is provided through the API as well. So all that's really awesome. So this is what we're going to be building today. But first, we're going to start just kind of with React basics and getting set up with that. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I will try to answer them. So with that, what you need to do now, just to actually get React installed to set up a project, is head over to your terminal. Does the API have Orlando? No, it's still the same API, okay? So we're still grabbing all the data from, it's metaweather.com, their API here. And it's still, for some reason, I mean, it's for the same reason it was before, but they don't have Orlando in their API, which is kind of sad. So you can kind of click through on their site and see all the different things they have. But for Florida, all they have is Jacksonville, Miami. So that's unfortunate, yeah. But there's lots of weather APIs. So if you really want one that does Orlando, then by all means, go out, find your own. There's lots of them. Many of them are free. And you can get one that does that. But this is just the one that we worked on before, so I want to kind of keep it consistent. Okay, so to actually set up our React project, we're going to be using something called Create React App. And actually, if you head over to the React docs, I believe this is what it tells you to do. So if you're actually trying to learn React on your own, if there's anything about this workshop you're confused about, or there's from time to time, even I go back here, you forget things and you need to remember how to do something, head over to react.js.org and read their official docs. They have some of the best documentation. It's really well done, regularly updated. And we're going to be using the Create React App tool today. I don't know if it mentions it on here, but yes, we're going to be using Create React App. So you don't actually have to install that at all to get started. What you need to do is just go to your terminal where you have npm. And if you run npx, which stands for np execute, Create React App, and then a folder that you want it to set up your project in. So in this case, let's see, I'm going to do Weather App 2.0, but you can call it whatever you want, and then hit enter. So this is going to take a second. So this right now, it's actually running like an npm script that is loading all the packages we need. So React itself is a library, right? So it's something that you can download from npm, and React actually has some dependencies, I'm sure, with other different things that it requires. So that's what we're installing right now. Might take a second here. So you can go ahead and let that run. The other thing we're going to be using today is Material UI. And Material UI is really great. That's why, so you see all these, this nice button here with this, when you click it, I don't know if you can see, but there's a little splash to show you clicked it. It's pretty cool. All these nice highlightable list. and that spinner, this nice card element. I didn't design all those myself. They're all from Material UI. So I'm going to show you, we're going to install that as well. And this is just a library that gives you actually implemented UI components. So all of the things in Material UI, you can build yourself with React and HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But why would you reinvent a nice button when someone else has already made one that's perfectly good, right? Maybe that is something you're interested in doing. But me personally, I'm happy to use this Material UI button and all these different elements they provide that are already very good. So that's great use for a library. We're going to install this with NPM as well. So once your project actually get your React project set up, you can go ahead and install Material UI with this npm command. So let's see. Okay, so mine finished. You can see it. It does a bunch of things. Like I think it sets up a Git project for you. There's not too much we need to worry about right here. Let's just go ahead and do our npm install. So we want to go ahead and install @Material UI/core. And you know what? I'll put this in the chat so that people can easily copy paste it. Make sure you get it right. So we'll install that. Okay, yes, I see a comment in the chat about if you don't have Node and such, then you can do sudo apt install node.js npm. Yes, if you're running Ubuntu, or if you have like the Windows subsystem for Linux, you can do that. If you don't have that, put it in the chat. I can try to walk you through. The install is pretty easy. Okay, so Material UI is installed. Great, that's pretty quick. If we actually sort of read what the Create React tool gave us, it tells you some interesting things. So like npm start is what we're mostly going to be using. That's actually how you start. You load up your project and build it. If you actually want to like compile the project, so the way React works, remember your browser can only serve HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So any framework or other language that you can run on the web, you're not actually running it. You're just probably compiling it into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So there's the npx command you need to run again too. You don't have to run it with this. So whatever you put here is going to be the file name, the folder that installs all this into. So yeah, remember your browser can only do HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So React is just a JavaScript library. And at the end of this, you can see if you actually want to like build the project and see like what it actually outputs. We can actually do that if you want. So let's do that. Oh, you need to actually go into the folder. What did I call it? Weather app 2.0. All right. Yeah, so make sure you actually change directories into the folder. So if you want to actually build it, you can see what it looks like. And then I'll show you what this is kind of like their base app looks like. We're going to do a lot of modifications, obviously, to get where we're going. Okay, so let's see if we can actually snoop around inside their build. So you can see this is all the stuff that's generated by the default build. So we can kind of read their index.html. Oh, it's not very human readable, is it? Well, they just decided to put it all in one line to save characters, I guess. But if we actually want to look at what this looks like, you can run npm start. And so this will, for the tool, it'll kick up a development server. And what's really nice about React's development server and Create React app is as you make changes, it will automatically reload them. So let's head back to our terminal. You'll want to open up like another terminal. There should be like a plus button if you're on VS Code or something like that. All right, and then all of our code is going to be inside of this source folder. So there's a lot of these other things going on. We don't really need to worry about those. And @.js is what we're going to be looking at. So what's actually cool about React is it's a way to embed. You kind of can embed your HTML into your JavaScript. And so there's a lot of mixed. This is very controversial. Like there's mixed feelings on. Some people really like this. I personally really like it. If you like JavaScript, you probably will like this. But there are some people who think that it really should be in a different file. But this is how React does it. And so you can kind of see right here. This is the image. There's our image tag. So remember, your HTML image is just img, and you load in the thing. So that's that spinning image there. And then see this edit right here, well, that's the same as this here. So if we actually change this to something else, like, and this is what's great about keeping the server. So remember my other terminal over here, this is still running, right? Well, if we save this and then go back, you see it has already reloaded that onto the page. So you don't have to be constantly hitting refresh like we were before. So this is another nice thing about using Create React App. You get that hot reload. How do you open the page again? So when you run npm start, it should just open it up for you. If it doesn't, you can just type this URL or this URL, either one, into your browser, and that should open it up as well. So you can always just do a new tab if the first one doesn't work for you. And okay, which folder did you go to for npm start? So it depends how you created the app. But whatever, so when you ran npx, right? So whatever folder whatever this thing here was, that'll be the folder where the app is created. So you need to then run a change directory for that. So if I'm back here, I created it in Weather App 2.0. So change directory into that folder. And now you're in the actual project and you should be able to run npm start. Let me know if you're able to get that to work. Okay, so we kind of have this basic project going. This is sort of just React's basic thing, but we don't really want to use React's base project. We want to make our own. So let's go ahead and go into our source folder, app.js, and let's just remove all the stuff they put in here. Okay, so you can kind of see the basic structure of it. Well, actually, let's leave it so I can sort of walk you through the basic structure here. So the way React works, it uses this language called JSX. And JSX is essentially like HTML, but you can embed it into your JavaScript. There's a few differences. So like if you're trying to use class is already a reserved word in JavaScript. So you can't use class for CSS classes. You have to use this class name instead. And a lot of the properties use camel case because that's the convention in JavaScript instead of HTML sometimes does dashes. The HTML will do things like this. But for the most part, it's the same. And what's really cool about it is it lets you build a lot more composable UI. So how many of you have used like a function before? Hopefully you've used a function. If you've come to any of my workshops, you probably have used a function because I think functions are pretty important. The nice thing about React is, so the reason you use a function is it's the reusability, right? Like a square root function. If you write a square root function, what's nice about it is you don't have to rewrite the logic every time you do it, right? You can just write this square root function once, and then you can square root things forever. If you want to do square root lots of things, you don't have to like go through, because actually doing a square root like algorithm, there is some complexity to it, especially on like writing a function for that. So any complex thing, instead of doing it over and over, you can just write a function for it once and then call the function. Well, React kind of applies the same idea to your UI. So let's go back to our working version of this, right? Look at these card elements here. Each one of these we want to lay out in essentially the same way. Well, if we were doing this in like raw HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, we might have to like copy and paste some HTML, or at least in our JavaScript kind of add the DOM nodes each time. And it's just not necessarily the cleanest way to express it. We want to be able to sort of apply that concept of a function to reuse something. And so that's what React is really good at, is reusing your components. So these things are called components. React has built-in ones for all of your basic things you have in HTML, like your divs, images, paragraphs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're going to be using is the Material UI library, which will let us be able to use the Material UI components. So we're going to start with, let's just start by getting a container. All right, so we can do that. And we can also go ahead and delete all this stuff because we don't really need any of their basic stuff there. So container is a component from Material UI that just lets you, basically what it does is centers the elements. There's a few other things it does, but basically you're just going to be able to center the elements. Oh, in chat. Okay. I'm completely lost with Node and all of that. I downloaded Node. That's it so far. Okay. So if you're still downloading Node, right? So you just need to go to Node, install either long-term support or current. I usually go for current. Then run that installer. Are you that far? Yes. Okay. Once you've done that, then what you need to do is run, and I really should just put this in the chat that way. So go to your terminal and you want to run this command, this npx create React app. Create React app is just a tool made by the React people that lets you quickly get a React app up and running. You don't have to use it to make a React app, but it's a good way to make a quick one. And then whatever that third sort of thing is, I did weather app -2.0, but that's just the folder name your project will be made in. So if you already have a weather app 2.0 for some other reason, you can call it whatever, it doesn't matter. And then you just want to change directory into that app, change directory into our source folder. Oh, the other thing we did is we installed Material UI. So here, let me put that in chat as well. That way you can catch up with that. And then once you're there, you should be good. We've just been editing app.js. So if you go into the source folder, src folder, and edit app.js. So we want to import this container. We also can get rid of some of this other stuff. Like we don't need this logo. I don't think we need app.css. We don't need any of that. So this is kind of your very basic. So let's see if this works. Reload the page. Oh boy, it's very mad at us. Let's see. Sometimes you just have to reload it. Nope, it's still mad. Container. This is working when I wrote it before. Oh, you know the other thing we need to do? We also need to import our font. So I forgot about this. You also need to get the Roboto font. So I'll put this in the chat as well. So this is the font that Material UI uses by default, and that may be why we're getting problems. So run that as well. So again, npm, if you weren't at our last workshop about Node, that's just your Node package manager. So this is how we install libraries. So like I didn't make this font. I didn't make Material UI. Oh, it pasted the same thing. Hold on. I didn't make any of these things. Someone else already made them, and I'm just using them because they're good. I like them. Actually, before I move on, I want to make sure, is everyone caught up with all of the installs? I know there's a lot of different things going on with that, and I don't want anyone to feel like they're behind it when we've already started and can't catch up. You keep getting an error with the npx install. Okay, if you have an old npm, what you can also do is if you do npm, if you do npm install --s global. So this is another way you can install. npx might only work on newer versions of Node. If you have kind of an older version, you can install create React app globally, and then you should just be able to run it directly. So the way that would look is like this. And then you should just be able to run create React app, and then whatever folder you want, just straight away like that. Okay. And okay, good. npx, great, just finished. Okay, make sure you install those other packages, the Material UI and the other one. How did you link your Node pack? Okay, so Node Package Manager, we're not linking anything. Node Package Manager is just how we're going to set up the project. So you should just be able to run, if you scroll up in chat, or I don't know. I don't think Zoom does chat history, which is annoying. You should just be able to run npx, but if you have an older version of npm, then you can also try the npm install global create React app first. But you should just be able to run it straight away by doing something like this. You cannot seem to add the Roboto font. So that you should just be able to run npm install font source Roboto. Make sure you typed it exactly like that. We may also need a box here. Keep coming with the questions. If you have anything, I don't want anyone to get lost here. So we may also need to put this box before we'll let it. I don't remember exactly how I started creating this. Let's see if that makes it happier. Wait a minute. You might have mismatching. Just keep putting, what was the command to run it again? Okay, so if you actually want to get the app started. Oh, you know why it's mad? It's because I already have one running. That's probably why it's angry. Okay, so the command to actually start it is just npm start. There. Sorry, it keeps taking me so long to type things because macOS is trying to auto-correct me to the right thing. Yeah, and if you actually read what it says when you run create React app, I'm pretty sure it says that somewhere in that pile of text, but it's a lot of words to read. Okay, let's just try to go back here and try this again. Oh, this is really not good. Well, this is not happening to me earlier. Let me just try removing this whole thing. Sorry about this, guys. I built this literally in the last week and it was fine when I just started it like this. So let's try it again. It could be that a new version of React got pushed and it's broken or something like that, which would be very, very unfortunate. While I'm reinstalling this, hopefully getting it working. If not, what I can do is go to my already built one and just like undo all the way back, which is probably not the best way to do it, but hey, times like this, you're happy about having Git. We'll give this one more shot. But again, if you do have any questions, yeah, thank goodness I did it in Git, right? Yeah, so actually, no, this is interesting. So React has a whole bunch of dependencies, 1,931. So there's a lot of different packages around there. Okay, Weather App 2.0. Let's start. Okay, this seems to be working. All right, so let's go ahead and install our mature UI. Please let me know if you're having any trouble getting stuff installed. I know installing is not your favorite part of the workshop, but it is important. Oh, package relocated. Okay, so actually what it wants us to do. So sometimes reading these warnings is important because it tells you things like, I guess they must have moved the package to @font_source /Roboto. Maybe that'll make it happier. So you can uninstall things with npm uninstall. Okay. Let's see what happens. Maybe if I just leave it all inside of this div, it'll be a little bit happier. Okay. So what if I try to use Material UI now? All right. So now if we actually want to import some components from Material UI. So I think it's at something. Yeah, at Material UI /core. And then inside here, the first thing we need is just a simple container. So, and we also probably should grab a box as well. So these are just, you can actually go and like read the Material UI docs if you want and see all the different components. So it gives you a big list of all the components. So if you want to see like what is container, the container centers your content horizontally. And so yeah, that's great. But you can read all about these components and do different things. Okay, so let's see if we can put this in a container here. So if you when you want to use a component in React, right? It's basically just like a souped up version of an HTML tag. One thing that's different about React components is they always will start with this capital letter here. So or at least that's the convention. So that's how you know it's a component versus kind of like a basic HTML element. So if we just want to get this container, let's see, that seems to be working, right? So I guess it's just angry when I remove these. Oh no, it seems okay now. Okay, maybe it was Huh, that's very interesting. Okay, well, it seems to be working now. NPM can be finicky. Sometimes you just gotta delete the whole project and start over. Okay, so our container, this is our basic container. It's gonna center our all of our things horizontally. That's great. We also want to go ahead and use a box. So boxes, what you can use box for is sort of formatting. It's like a formatting container, a lot like we use div in regular HTML. So if we just want to put everything inside this box and maybe give it, I think I give it a margin of 5. So a lot like HTML, you can set properties in your tags. So in this case, we have this M property, and that's going to be our margin. And then one thing that's a little bit different about React is if you want to use direct values from JavaScript, then you need to enclose in these braces. So if you just want to use like a string, you can do that. But if you want to use like direct values, and we'll see some examples of like how this is going to make our life a lot easier. All right, so let's take a look at this and see. All right, so you notice, see how we have this kind of margin? It's not all the way. Before we did that margin, it's like right up against the top. But now when we add that margin of 5, it kind of spaces itself out. How nice, right? Very nice. Okay, so we've got that. Now let's actually start looking at what we actually wanted to use for our app. So let's see if we can. So in our actual like overall weather app, right? We don't just want to put hello world. We actually need to have an input box, right? So we need to be able to search, and we also need that button. So let's take a look at what Material UI can do for us there. So for our button, we can actually just import button from Material UI. That is something that it provides. And then there's also I think it's, let's see, text. I think it's text field. So again, we're just importing these from the library. These are things like we haven't built, they're already provided for us. Yeah, text field. Okay, so we don't want to necessarily print this out. Let's just go ahead and deploy a basic text field and see what happens. See if that does anything for us. Okay, so you can see it's not actually the most visible here, but it has deployed this little text field. We can type things in, and it has some cool animations that are sort of built in. Let me check chat and see if anyone is caught up. Oh, lots of messages. Okay, can we have a workshop on how to use all that fancy stuff you're using? I'm not using any fancy stuff. This is just this is Firefox, fairly standard browser, and this is just a terminal. So if you have like VS Code, you should have a built-in terminal. If you're talking Vim, I've been thinking about doing an intro to Vim workshop because a lot of people seem to ask about that. But honestly, VS Code's probably better. I just use it because I've used it for a long time. Let's see. I'm getting invalid hook call with container. Oh, that's not good. Well, maybe try reinstalling everything. That is really my only suggestion. I don't know why that's happening. It could be the font. So maybe that could have been the one thing. So if you install @fontsource/Roboto instead of font source Roboto, because apparently this is deprecated, and then it says migrate to this other one. So maybe if you install that, it'll be happier. Or just remove the whole project and try again. Okay. How can you locate app.js? All right. Oh, can you copy the good one in the chat? Yeah, I can. Okay. So app.js. So, okay. Remember, whatever folder you did npx create React app, right? So this thing here, whatever you named it, that's the folder it's going to be in. So first you need to change directory into that folder. And then if you look inside of that folder, you have a bunch of different things. Node modules, some stuff having to do with your node dependencies. But the main thing we need to pay attention to is SRC. And anytime you're trying to work on a project, SRC is always a good bet for where you should start. Because usually it stands for like source code, right? So if you look in there, that's most likely where like the main stuff in the project lives. And then there's a whole bunch of files in here, but actually we don't care about any of them except for app.js. It's the only file we're going to be worrying about today. Because with React, you can actually write you can write your HTML, your CSS, and JavaScript all in one gigantic file. And so it's kind of a little bit different than doing it the traditional way. Oh, I just realized I DM'd someone the good one instead of putting it in chat. Okay. There's that. If it doesn't like box, make sure you import it. So you need to have this import statement. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and do this now because we're going to be importing a lot of things from Material UI. Also, this workshop is probably going to be a little bit longer because people wanted some longer workshops. So if you need to leave throughout, like, don't worry, this is all recorded. So by all means, go ahead and leave, and you can watch the rest later if you have somewhere else you need to be. Okay, so we've imported these things. We got our text field working. One thing you can do, if you don't want to put anything inside of an element in JSX, you can always close it by doing a little slash here at the end of your tag. And it means the exact same thing as doing this. So if you're going to put nothing inside of it anyway, it's often considered better style to do it like this. Just a little bit cleaner. Let's also get our button. And let's do it this way as well. Save that. And let's head back to Firefox. Okay. Did it? Oh, you know what we need to do is we need to actually add some text to our button so it'll show up. So let's see. What do we want to do? Just like click me or something like that? Probably be good. So we need to set a few properties on our button to actually make it appear. So the first one is variant. I think this just controls how it looks. So there's some different options, but the docs for Material.js just use all of these variant equals contain. So that's fine. We can also set our color. I'm going to set the primary. You can use, I think there's also like a secondary one, but don't need to worry too much about that. Oh, and you know what? We actually do need to close this because inside we're going to have text of the button. So add those properties. Then you should get a nice clickable button. There you go. If you're able to get that to work, then that's great. One thing we can do to test, how are you getting those cool code suggestions? That is actually just a plugin. So if you mean like when if I'm trying to make a text field and then I can pop it open, that's a plugin and just a key binding. And then if you mean like, you can always, Vim just has built-in suggestion stuff. So if you just want to suggest random words, you can always get suggestions of stuff that you typed before. if you're using like a nice editor, it should have some mechanism for like autocomplete and suggestions and stuff. I would totally, unless you're like insanely fast typer, autocomplete is such a great thing. Okay, so we've got this button here. Yeah, okay. I'll do an intro to Vim workshop at some point maybe and show people all these things. All right, and what's cool about this, so let's actually see like if we want our button to do something, we can set an onClick parameter on it. So if you remember the way we're doing this in vanilla.js, right, we would do something like, or what was it, add event listener, right? Hopefully some people remember this from before. Do something like this, and then you pass in whatever function you want to do. So maybe we want to console.log hello, right? And this is how we would add an event listener. The way you do that in React is instead of calling functions to set this up, you can just buttons or most things will just have an onClick little property in the HTML you can just set. And then you have to use the braces. Anytime you're basically not using a string, you're going to have to use these braces to enclose it. You can just set the function you want straight on the element. We are maybe using a little bit too much space on this line, though. So never fear, we can wrap this. Okay, so that's how we can sort of set up our button. And now if we go back to here, and it should already be live reloaded. And notice when we click it, we get our hello world in the console. When we click it lots of times, you can see the little thing over here. We're getting hello world in our console lots of times. All right, so we've got that. What we could do is probably space this out a little bit better too, but right, make more sense to do it. Well, nah, that looks fine. Okay, formatting's not too important. So we've got our button and our text field. One thing we can also do to kind of bundle them together is put them inside of a form element. This is just what I did in my project, so we're going to go ahead and do that. It looks like you don't necessarily strictly need to do that, but I think it formats a little differently when you do. Is there a reason we don't want to use the default imports? Not really. Those are just the default ones. So for your basic like create React app, there's some CSS to style that like spinning. Like we can actually go and look at it, at least briefly, but I don't want to waste too much time. But you can see, so this is like there's the animation that makes it spin and some other stuff, some other CSS to kind of style that page. But we don't need it, so no need to import it. We're just going to use all of our Material UI stuff. Okay. So we've kind of got our two UI elements here, right? The next thing we need is somewhere to display. So if you remember our original weather app, we kind of had three components. We had this button, right? We had this text area you type. We had this button that you can click. And then we had like an output area where we display the data. And so for that, we can go ahead and use, let's see, what did I use in the main one? We can use a card. So that's what I did. If you remember from the beginning when I kind of showed you the demo, those like square thingies that display the data all nicely, that is a card. And that's part of Material UI as well. So let's go ahead and add a card. And to start, let's just put a card inside of our app, just so we can see what it looks like. So let's see. Let's put it after the box here, and let's put some data inside. Okay, so in this case, if you look, it actually makes the formatting is not exactly what we want, right? It makes a super long card. I don't know if you can see it with data like this. So actually, the Material UI library, if you want to configure a card well, you need to use this card content. It uses some other components. So inside of a card, just like in a list, you need to have list item components if you want to sort of display right. This card, you need to use this card content thing. So we need to import that as well. And then inside of that, there's actually a typography component. So the main thing about React is these components, you have all these components, and these are all just defined in the library. You can, of course, build your own. We are actually going to build a couple of our own components here shortly, once we start to get an idea of what's going on here. But yeah, so let's put, hello. There's also probably a few properties we should set on this. But for now, let's just see how that looks. Oh, not defined. Sometimes you'll have to reload. Oh, did I not import it? Oh, I forgot to import it. Okay, so that looks a little bit better, right? Kind of got this card. We've got something inside of it. All right, the next thing we want to do is, well, has everyone made it that far first? So let me stop and take any questions, if any. I know the chat hasn't said a whole lot about. Are we all good? I'm here to see one yes. One person says yes, we're doing well. Yes, okay, great. Yeah, so we've got this card. And okay, here's one thing that's actually, so to actually start learning what we're going to be doing with React, a component is just a function. So this app component, actually, like if we go back to, let's go back to that build, like here. If I do npm run build, if we actually look in the React app says I don't have a default export imported as app, and you're getting an invalid hook call. Okay, well, if you don't have a default export, are you sure you have the do you have this export default app at the bottom here? No. Are you looking at index.js instead of app.js? That may be your problem. If you're in here instead, you want to be in app.js. And if you don't have an export default app, you can just add one. There's your imports. And you're getting an invalid hook call. Yeah, I'm not sure why that shouldn't happen. But then again, it happened to me when I tried to set up. What you can try is go to your file manager, delete the whole app, and then reinstall it. Sometimes npm. The other thing it could be is the font. If you didn't, it could be that font messing things up for some reason. Like, so if you make sure you install it like this npm install at font source. I'll put it in the chat one more time. That could be the problem. Yeah, if you have to take off, that's totally fine. Okay. With any luck, hopefully, what we wanted to go look at is what's actually inside. What's actually going on inside React. So React, after you do a build, this is what you'd actually deploy. So inside your, let's see if we can, that didn't help. Well, inside here somewhere, basically, it's just going to be an HTML file. And at some point, you should find, what React does is it basically just makes one div. Here it is, okay? You can see it right here in the output. So the way React works is it doesn't actually make very much HTML. This is actually a pretty small HTML page because if we go, like we can scroll to the end and see, but it basically has just a sort of a stock HTML page with one div in it with ID of root. And then what it does is it uses JavaScript to render the entire UI. So you remember how we were able to add UI elements using things like document dot, we had all those document dot this, document dot create element. And we had ways to like insert things when we sort of built some of our very first web apps. Well, React inserts uses those same APIs to do everything, but it wraps them in this very nice component sort of structure. So you can write these components and you can think of it like this, but React actually renders everything with JavaScript. I tried, okay, let's see. I tried coming out the line with import React and yelled at me. Why is it not yelling at you? That's a good question. Did you, it could have something to do with, I wouldn't comment out. If there's an import React from The reason is if you're not using Create React App or like the latest version, you may need to have like I don't remember what's in index.js. Like, did you comment out this line? Are you still in index.js? That may be your problem. You shouldn't, this should all be in a different file if you said use Create React App. And yeah, don't mess with this file. But if you look, what it actually does is it grabs that one element, and then it just renders this app component. And notice it imports that from our app. So if we go to our app, right, this function app is that app component, and it just renders that one, this component into our UI with JavaScript. You're in app.js. Huh, interesting. Well, I'm not sure. Maybe try running again. At this point, if you have versions behind, things might be slightly different. It's probably, even if you leave all that stuff from React, it's probably fine. Like, just change what's inside this return and you should be okay. And yes, everything's in one file. So we're going to have, right now it's mostly just like HTML and imports, right? But we're going to be adding some actual JavaScript to this to do the things we want to do. And you'll see how it all kind of merges together. And some people might call it like an unholy union of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Some people really don't like it, but some people like it. What does text field do again? So text field is just material UI's this thingy. It's this typable box. Then our button is just this button. And then this card is where we're getting this hello. And inside of our card, in order to make it display right, we need to use this card content tag. And inside of that, we need a typography tag for like text. Because you can put other things in here like images. Like that's how we're going to display those kind of weather icons if we get that far. All right, if everyone is good with this, let's actually start going to like fetching from our API. So what we need to do in order to actually get our data, right? Remember our friend metaweather.com, who has not always been our friend? Other input? Yes, there's actually lots of different things. And I wish I had more time to go over this stuff. But like if you look, so there's under this inputs, you've got a whole bunch of different options. So text field just happens to be one of them. Button is one of them, but like you can do checkboxes if that's what makes you happy, or sliders, like, you know, whatever. All these different things are all provided and built into Material UI. It's really quite great. All right, so in order to actually fetch your data from metaweather.com, if you guys remember, we just need to go on here and grab some of these URLs. So the first fetch we need to do is when we actually search for something. So we can sort of do a test here. All right, if we want to search for London, we need to go to this URL, this metaweather.com search query equals whatever. And then we can get this WOE ID. And that is going to give us that's our where on earth ID. And we can use that to access a lot more information about this city. So first we want to sort of search. And what's interesting about this search is it always gives us an array. So if you put something generic like new in, it's going to give you, let me make it a little bigger. It's going to give you all the different things that sort of start with new or like could possibly be new, right? And then we want to sort of have the user be able to select from those. But for now, let's just work on the very first one. That's a feature we can add later. So to actually do this fetch, we need to, let's copy this URL. Now there are some, oh, that's not what I want later. Okay. So I'm just going to call this the city URL because this is how we get our options for city. And we want to leave this query equals just blank so we can add the user input into that. Can you copy in the chat? Oh, yes, I will. In fact, I'll just copy the whole line, save you even more typing. This project, by the way, is on GitHub. So I think it's under like weather app improved. If you go to my GitHub, it should be like weather app improved or something like that. And you can find this project in all of its finished glory. And it should look mostly something like this when we're done today. Okay, so we're going to need this URL. The other thing we're going to need to do is, because this API is kind of, it's set up with some CORS errors. Basically, this website doesn't want to be served to browsers. It only wants to serve itself up to other servers. And so if we were actually doing this in like real production, like, and like doing this is like a serious app, what we'd want to do is set up our own server that we make a request to, that will make a request to the API for us. That's what you're supposed to do. But that would be beyond the scope of sort of this React workshop. So what we're going to do instead is just grab an extension that will mock out these errors for us. So on Firefox, you need to grab cores everywhere. This is the one I'm using. If you install this cores everywhere extension, you should be good. If you're on Chrome, there's another one that I was testing earlier was working. So let's open that up. Come on. Yeah, so if you grab this Mosif cores, and there might be some other ones that work. These are just the ones that I happen to test. If you grab this, install that, and then make sure you enable it, then this will fix. What it does is it kind of disables some security things about the request that will let us be able to receive the request. But you should not browse with this on. Like don't use this regularly, only if you're trying to like develop against an API that has problems like this. Otherwise, you should disable it because it actually is bad for your security. But yeah, grab those extensions because that's going to be able. The other thing you can do is if you want to use that proxy we were using before, the cores. If you don't want to install those extensions, like because it can be kind of scary, you can do the cores anywhere API. What they did do though is since we did the last demo, they got mad that so many people were using it. Probably not because of us, but just in general. And so you need to like actually browse to it and then request temporary access. But then you should just be able to kind of copy this URL and append it in front, which is what we were doing before. So this is the other thing you can do. You can do it like this cores anywhere. If you just look up cores anywhere, you'd be able to get the link. And then if you just append that in front, it should get rid of your problems as well. But it is rate limited now, like a lot more than it was before, which is why I switched into the extension way. Because I know that won't have issues. Okay, so we have this URL. So how do we actually, let's just start by we want to make this fetch. So now we need to start talking about what React is actually doing with this app component. So to make a component is just a function that returns some HTML of what to render. So what's nice about this is you can kind of compose things very easily. So let's say we want this card to not be part of our main app anymore. We want to sort of break it on because there's too much stuff. So we can call that our output component. And we can actually just move all this down to here. So remember, we need to return it. And always wrap what you're returning in parentheses because JavaScript has bugs. And if you don't put the parentheses, it will get quite angry. See, unreachable code, it gets mad. Can you copy that URL, this one? Oh, the proxy. Yeah. If you just search up cores anywhere. If you just look that up, it'll be like one of the first links. It should be like Heroku app, something like that. So we can actually extract this output to here, and then you can just use an output component. Like that, okay? So see how we just use the name of the function, and now we can use that as sort of an HTML component. And that way now, if we want to have, let's say we want to have a couple of these cards, right? Instead of copy pasting this whole bunch of stuff, we can just do it the one time. Here, I will copy it in case anyone else is trying to use it. Okay, so now you can see it makes 3 sort of cards here, which is nice. Okay, so that's that, and this is what's cool about React is you can have this composability, and so you don't have to like keep copy pasting the same thing. You can re-specify your components, and also you can sort of write your JavaScript, like your on-click, sort of straight into the component. How this actually works, though, is React will call this function to generate the HTML every time something changes. So if we want to actually be able to access different values, this function is actually just getting called. So like if we want to see how often it gets called, it probably only be called like once or twice. Let's just log like 5, for example. And then we can open our browser back up. And then we can go to the log. So we can see it's just a regular JavaScript function. It's getting called. And nope, OK. Eventually, if something on the screen changes, then React will do what's called re-render. And it will recall that function to reset up the component. And why this can matter is if you want to have like some state, for example. So let's say we want to, let's undo this whole output component thing for now. Just put it back in. Let's say we want to display a number. So if we want our app to be like stateful, we want our app to be able to actually change and not just be a static UI, we need to use what's called some state. And the way you use state in a function is with this sort of curious syntax. You can put whatever number you want in here. I'm just going to put 0. Basically, so you need to use this const and then this sort of array syntax. And what this is called an array destructure. So useState gives us back an array of 2 things. If we want to sort of pluck the 2 things out, then we can use this array destructure. It's the exact same as if we did this. So for people who aren't familiar with array destructure syntax, it's the same thing as this, okay? So basically, it's just a quick way to grab the values out and sort of define variables that equal those. Does that make sense to everyone? The other thing we'll need to do is we'll need to actually import this useState. And you can just import that straight from React. All right, so in this case, we're going to just stick with their way because it's much shorter. And so what this will do is you get 2 things back. First, you get a value, and this is sort of a variable that you can use across renders. And then you'll get a function, this setNum, that can be used to actually set the value. So never do this. Okay, if you do this, React will not work. Okay, this is part of React's sort of API. You need, anytime you want to change something, instead of just assigning it, you need to use this set function. So this would be the right way to do that. If you're trying to do basically this, then instead call the set function and we'll do the right thing. And inside this useState is the default value. So we want to start it at 0. And then down here in our typography, so what is this going to actually do? Is it going to display, if we don't include these, it just displays the word num. But remember, when we use these curlies around our variable name, it will use whatever the current value of that variable is and render that into the HTML. So in this case, it will render 0 because our state is currently 0. So to actually see this, you can see, okay, there's a 0 there. Now, why wouldn't we just put a 0 here, right? It's because what React helps us with is if we want this to change. So now let's get rid of this onClick and do something more interesting. So let's make another function. Let's make a function that, let's make an add1 function. Okay, and all it will do is set our number equal to number plus 1. And then on click, we want to do that add1. All right, do people see what's going on here? I'll give you a minute so you can kind of copy that over to whatever you're writing. So this is how you, and this is why React is actually cool. If you do this, now if we click the button, look, it'll change and it will re-render it, and you don't need to do anything at all. Versus if you're trying to do this with vanilla JavaScript, you would need to like listen for the button click, then like update the variable, and then like redraw it, figure out, like look up the component that was in and redraw it manually yourself. So this is why React actually helps you. This is what makes it better than just doing regular HTML. Is you can do now very complex things based on variables and state without really having to worry too much about how it's going to get rendered. Okay, so this is a very interesting thing we can do. We have a question. Yes, I see someone raise their hand. Unless you weren't actually trying to raise your hand. Can you scroll back up to the last function, please? Oh, yeah. Let me delete this. You mean just our add one function? Yeah, so this is how you can, and this is what this use state does. So it allows us, what's cool about it is it lets us sort of define a variable inside of our component that will change, that kind of lives through each render. Because React can call this re-render function at any time. You should assume that React is going to call your component functions hundreds or thousands of times a second, potentially. It doesn't actually do that, but it will behave as if you did that. Anytime any state changes, anytime one of these set somethings is called, React knows that it's going to need to re-render the UI. And so it feels like that whenever the variable is updated, the UI will just automatically update, which is pretty cool. All right, so let's go back to our weather thing that we need to do. So what we actually want to do is fetch when this button is actually clicked, right? So let's make a different function set. Let's do fetch weather data. Don't really want to just add one. This counter thing is kind of cute, but not really what we want to achieve today. So we want to do this fetch weather data. We don't need this anymore either. Sorry if you just spent a lot of time writing that down. Oh, now it's mad about this. Okay, so in order to fetch our data here, do people remember our fetch and promise? Well, we're going to be using that. Now, remember, before we read this value out of the text box. How do we do that with React? The way we do that with React is setting up a controlled input component. So what we need to do is actually watch this text field. Currently, when the user types things in this text field, we just kind of ignore it. We need some way to track that in JavaScript. So the way you do that is set up some states. So I don't know, let's just call this, I think I called it query in the other version. All right, and the query is just what the user is trying to search up. So we're gonna have this query, set query, use state, and what do we want it to be by default? Probably just the empty string, right? Or you can also leave it empty if you want it to be null. Okay, and inside of our text field, one thing you can do, let's do this. This is just a mature UI thing, has nothing to do with React. But if you set a just comment this out. If you set a label on your text field, then it'll give that text in sort of a grayed out that you can, and it will then sort of zoom it up like that, so you can type things, and it's nice. So it's a good way to sort of prompt the user that they need to put a city there. Not strictly essential, but. And then what's actually going to be doing the real work here is this onChange parameter. So a lot like onClick, onChange is going to call the given function. Anytime the value in the text field changes. And we need to actually take a look at that event because we want to know what it changed to. Yeah, well, no, this is still using an event listener, okay? So that's how it actually works. If you want, like, what's inside, like, React, what are we importing? Like, that's what's going on. But you'll see that at least some people like doing it this way better and think it's more scalable. So we get, it's basically the same thing. This onType is just our event listener, and we go to our event.target.value, and that will tell us what it changed to. Then we set the query. The other thing we need to do is actually set our value of this component to be query. Otherwise, like here, I'll show you what happens. Otherwise, it won't update. So if you try to, okay, but it won't update the variable correctly. This is actually one of the worst things about React is like having to do this for input elements. It doesn't, I think they could do this maybe in better ways, but it's fine. So you just need to set our value of our text field to query. And now, well, what we can also do is just log out our query value each time to sort of see if the variable actually is changing as we go. Because remember, this app function, every time query changes, this app function is going to get re-rendered. So let's sort of reload the whole page here, open up our console. So, okay, so it already gave us empty string. And if we type things, notice every time it's in query, that value is now like they're tied together. So anytime this happens, anytime that one of them changes, the other one will also change, which is cool. Okay, so now we have access to that. Great. So now we can actually do this fetch weather data, right? So we can fetch this, and our value that we now need is in query. And remember, to use fetch, you need to then use this .then. And our blob to blob.json. And if you weren't at our previous workshop about all of this, then don't worry too much about it. Just sort of the stuff you have to do in order to extract the proper data from the API. Oh, what is the arrow thing? Yeah, that's our arrow function. So this is the same as, do we remember our good friends, the anonymous function? So that is the same as doing that. The arrow just makes a fun. So how do you type it? Oh, how do you type it? Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. It's just an equal sign and a greater than next to each other. I just have a custom font that when you have that, it makes it into an arrow because I think it's pretty. But it's just an equal sign and a greater than. Yeah. No, sorry about that. I really should probably stop using this font because people ask me about that all the time. It's bad for demos, right? Okay. Oh, data's not defined. That's not good. Oh, okay. So now we have our data. We also need to do, so first we do this blob to blob.json. That just makes sure we get our JSON data back. Let's log out the data we get when we get it back and see if this is working for us. So this is the point where you may need to like enable your extension. So for mine, you just click it. The other one, I think you like right click it or something, because otherwise you're likely to start getting like chorus errors. So let's type something in and click this button. And there we go. We got some data back. Text doesn't show up when I type it. Then you probably, so this is what I was trying to tell you before. If you forget to do one of the various things, did you put value equals query? Did you set on change to be that function? And then did you actually write this function? As long as you do those things, it should work. Okay, so if you didn't set on change, so what's happening is when you type, it's changing it, but then React is overwriting it, because if you have value equals query, React is just overwriting it with empty string every time. So that's why you need to make sure you actually update React and what's happening too. Okay, so we're actually getting some data back. This is good. So we're getting back our objects. So we get this sort of New York and where on earth ID, and this is great. All right, so for our very first one, we're just going to do the same way we did last time and grab the first element. If we have time, because I know this workshop's already getting a little bit longer than I thought it would be, which is fine. I know there's a lot of questions, and even I had some trouble getting things set up. So that's fine, but we may not be able to get to everything that I wanted to do. So let's just go ahead and do the same we did last time and pluck off that first element. So we can worry about implementing the other things later. So we're going to grab that very first city, right? So we actually, from the API, we get back this array of one or more things, or maybe zero. And our first item is going to have a city name, and it's going to have our where on earth ID. The where on earth ID is the important part. That's what we can use to hit the API again to get. So like let's take New York, right? If we use this, and then if you go to the same URL / and just after location, you put that where on earth ID, you'll get all of the information about the location. Okay, yep, if you have to go, totally fine. So we're going to get all the information about that. So let's actually add that URL to our application. So we just have that. So what do we want to call that? And it's basically just the same URL as before, but just you get rid of the search stuff. So if we want to actually grab our ID, that's just going to be city dot where on earth ID. And then we want to do another fetch. Why would we not use async and await like last week? Yeah, you can. So if you want to instead do it, I'm just doing it this way because this is how we originally sort of learned to do it in the other application. So from people who are in that workshop. But if you want to do async await, that probably does clean it up a little bit, honestly. Okay. So now we're going to have, let's call this something else, weather data or city data. That's a good way to put it. Okay, so we have this. Let's actually log that and make sure that that is working. All right, so let's try this request again. Okay, so we first get that first set of data back, and then we do get back. Sorry, this is so small. I can't figure out how to make this console like blow up to be larger. We get this object here back with our data about our specific city. Most notably our consolidated weather, which gives us the next 6 days of forecasts, which is really nice. So let's try just outputting one of these forecasts. So in this case, the things we want to grab are probably I think what we did last time is we did max temp, we did min temp, and we did, what was the other thing we did? Oh, the weather state, so snow. So those are, let's see, max temp, min temp, weather state name. Okay, so high temp. So we need to use, so inside, let's actually look at the structure data we get back, right? The whole thing is inside of an object. And then object dot consolidated weather is this sub array. And then we want to grab the very first day just for our first one. So the way that's going to look is first consolidated weather. And then we grab off that very first day. Yeah, I can leave the code up for a minute. Okay, so that's the high temp. Or no, that's not the high temp. That's the weather data. Oh, I gotta go back and see what it was. Max temp and min temp. Okay, sorry. Let me actually just go back and check and make sure that is correct as well. Yeah, weather state name. Okay, good. All right, yeah, there's the code. So we grab out our high temp, grab out our low temp, grab out our weather state, and then we're going to want to somehow render this to the UI. So before, what we did is we just directly, we had like an output thing, and we just did output dot inner HTML equals all of our data, and then we just put all of our things that we wanted inside there. The way we do this in React is with state, because this could change over time. Like we do another fetch, right? Then what's in this card is going to be different. So we want to actually set up state for this. So let's set up some state. So what do we want to call this? I think we can just call this like weather data or something. And by default, let's set to null. So we know there's nothing. Null is just like nothing or the absence of anything. So we put that in there. And now we can put all of this stuff inside of our state. So now we can set our weather data, and we can use an object literal. So yeah, do you need me to scroll back up to this? The only line I added up here was this const weather data. equals use state. And I don't think, if I make it a little smaller, you might be able to see it all at once. Yeah, there we go. So we have a high, we have a low, and our weather state. And then we're going to set that data into our state. Really, we can just do this on one line. It should be okay. And if you're not used to this syntax with the brackets, just writing the brackets anywhere. When in JavaScript, if you just put brackets somewhere and then put things inside of it, it's going to be what's called an object literal. And so it's just going to make basically a struct with these things inside of it. It'd be the same way, same thing as doing like, if we assign this and then pass that in. So this is just how you make basically a struct in JavaScript. But instead of making a short temporary variable for that, usually people will just make like an anonymous one and just pass it directly. All right, so we set our weather data. What we can do to check to make sure this is working is let's log our weather data each time we go around this, each time we re-render. Is everyone good with the code for now? Or should I leave it up for another minute? All right, I'm not seeing anything. I'm gonna flip back so we can see this in action. All right, so we type something. So you can see initially it's null. Oh, when we click it, it's going to grab that, and then here we go. Here's our change data, and we can see we extracted our high temperature, our low temperature, and weather state into this object. We probably should get rid of some of these console.logs because we're starting to get a lot of spam, but okay. So our data is now there. Now what we need to do at this point is you actually use this data to render to the UI. So what we can do people all caught up to this. I know no one said anything before, but I don't want people to get left behind. I'm just gonna, unless someone says otherwise, I'm gonna assume we're good to go on. So what we can do, usually what I do is if you're gonna have like some dynamic content that can change, make a temporary variable for it up here. So I'll make an output variable. One thing that's cool about React is you can actually just store HTML inside of a variable. Something broke while getting the OID, but I couldn't tell you what. It says those are not defined. Check that you have these lines correct. So you should grab this data. Well, it could be, did you do this dot then with the blob to blob JSON? And then if you grab the data, you don't need this log. Make sure you grab data 0 and then store that, or you don't have to store it. You could just do, you couldn't do this all in one line to be a little more efficient. But this is basically what you should have. Let me know if that fixes it for you. So, okay, what's cool about React is you can store HTML into so like, let's say we just want to make a paragraph, right? You can actually store HTML into a variable and then use it later. And it isn't so great in this case, right? If you just have a constant, but if you want to have something that changes and then re-renders, then it's very helpful. So if we take a look at what this looks like, oh, it's mad that we used paragraph. We can just do a string instead. It's already, since we're already inside of a typography thing, it's unclear about that. And you can see that will render. But what we want to do in this case is render out a string of our weather data. So let's let's see. In this case, I think it'd be good to do, if you're not familiar with the template literal, this is a great time to become familiar with it because it's a great feature in JavaScript. If you use right next to your 1 key, there should be like the tilde key. Well, if you don't shift it, you get this backtick character. And if you use that instead of the normal string, you get some cool features. So one of them is you can just use variables with this notation like this. So if we want to say, like, for example, hi is going to be some temperature, then we can do that. And then in this case, we'll want to have like a break. So, well, there's a few ways we can do this. Unexpected end of JSON input at the first dot then and fetch weather data. Where'd you put the WoID URL? Oh, it's up here. You can put it anywhere since it's just a string literal constant. Not a big deal that it's in that particular place, but yeah, well, it's the same as, if you look, it's the exact same as the city one, except you just strip off this search and query. But I can put it in chat if you want. How do you get the degree symbol? I don't know. It's just, I did a Vim thing for it. So Vim has this cool digraph feature for it, for typing those easily. But I would just, you can just search up degree and copy it. Like that's honestly the easiest way. It's just, if you don't have something built in your editor, the alt codes are too hard to remember. Just search up degree symbol and then copy paste it from the first site. Also not super essential to the to what's going on here. Okay. All right, so let's try printing out some of this. I wonder, see, since we're just doing a string, let's just check this and make sure this works before we get too carried away. Oh, high temp is not defined. That's not good. Oh, it should be weather data dot high temp. Okay, so you can also separate these into multiple variables if that's what you want. But I did not do that. Weather data is null. Oh, yes. Okay, so this is what I was going to say before. So what we need to do is actually, before we use this variable, we need to check if it's null or not. So here's one way you can do this. So if it's not null, then set it. Otherwise do nothing. So we just let it be null by default. Let our output be null. And if we have some data, then go ahead and set that output to be something real. And if you render, here's something about React. If you try to render null, it'll just render nothing. So that's a very convenient thing you can do. Also, if you like the ternary operator, that's what I would use here, but a lot of people aren't familiar with it, so I try not to use it too much. But you can do something like this. You can do it the ternary way too, if that's what makes you happy. Okay, and we get back a number. So this number is probably not right because we have to convert it to Fahrenheit because this is all Celsius data from this API because I think it's a European who runs it. So we can just write a function to do that. This is all stuff we sort of did in our original app as well. So yeah, if you want to convert to Fahrenheit, that's probably good. Especially if you're going to put the degrees Fahrenheit, you probably should do that. Okay, let's try this again. Oh, we didn't actually call it. Okay. I guess we have two options. It's probably better if we just fix it as soon as we get the data, right? Instead of waiting to render to do it. Is everyone good with all this? How are you selecting the high temp variable? It's not in the global scope. It is. I did get an error because it's inside this weather data. So this weather data is, in fact, you know what? Why don't I just get rid of this because it seems to be confusing. Oh, he sent that before I got the error? Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's just because it's inside this object, and that's why it didn't work. So yeah, it doesn't work. You can't do that. There's no magic. Yeah, okay. Let's see if this works now. Okay, that looks closer to like a reasonable number for what? I think it's grabbing, is it New York? Yeah, New York. Today, the high was apparently 34. Sounds balmy. All right, let's see if we can't render in the rest of the data. So this might be a good instance where we want to do this in a slightly different way. So let's go ahead and extract to a component, because anytime you're starting to get like huge trees of stuff in one function, one of the best things about React is kind of extracting to components to try to split up your code a little bit, just like doing functional decomposition, right? Don't write your entire program in main, not a good idea. Well, same thing here. So let's just put this to like an output component. Remember to wrap it in parentheses. What is it angry about now? Oh, I grabbed this container line. And then you can render that with just an output component like that, or like this. But now, okay, how does output have access to this? It doesn't. So what you do is you can pass it as an argument. In React, this is called a prop. Okay, so we're going to use some props. The way you use a prop, you get your props passed in as an argument to your function, and then you can peel off what you want. So in this case, we know we're going to get an output prop, or I guess we call it whatever, but let's see, maybe, yeah, I guess weather. You can peel off what you want with this syntax. So this props is an object. If you want to, what this basically is doing is, here, it's probably the simplest way to do it. And then if we set weather equals something here, so like let's say we say weather equals, I don't know, snowy. So if you pass something in, anything you pass as a prop here in the HTML will magically go into props dot whatever it is. So this is weather here. So here in our output, it's going to be props dot weather. And so I guess you can also just use it directly if you want. So if we do this, now, go back here. It's not defined, I think, yeah. Okay, you can see it prints snowy. But if we pass different things in, so what's cool is we don't usually just pass that, you pass in your variable. So in this case, we can pass in our output. And that's how you refactor it to like a new component. So now there's nothing. But if we do, yeah, for some reason, enter refreshes on mine. Okay, then you get that data there. So that's how you can sort of refactor to a component here. Also now, probably what we want to do is, can you show the console logs again? You don't need to put the console logs. They're mostly just for debugging and seeing what you're doing. Do you just want to see the logs? There's a lot of like nulls and random stuff in there now because we're printing out some values each time. I'll probably get rid of some of these. We don't really need all of these if everything's working right. You're not getting the city's nor temperature when you type new in your text field. Okay, interesting. Do you get, so what you should do if you want to debug this, go to after your first fetch when you get the data and log the data and see, do you get the data with the city, right? So the first time when you fetch, you should get data that has like the city and the weather, where on earth ID. To actually get then you can go to your second fetch here and log again your data to see if you got all the city specific data, not just a list of cities, and see what you get there. Where you define output, right here. So that's just part of this. This is all inside this main app function. So we're just saying output is null, and then we're going to maybe set output to the temperature if we actually have some weather data. And then we're going to pass that output into our weather prop of our component called output. I guess that's kind of confusing, right? We should call this something else. I don't know, weather out or something. Display, that's a good idea. Output isn't defined. Well, do you say let output equals null before you do return in your app? Try refreshing. Sometimes React, if a compile fails, then React doesn't realize until you refresh. Oh, still saying output isn't defined. Well, do you set output to null specifically? Make sure you set output to null. Well, first just set output to something random like hello. And then try to use it and see if that works. Or do you mean capital output? Like I just changed that to display so the names aren't so confusing. It could be either of those potentially. Yeah, oh, it's the lowercase one? Well, what line does it say it's missing? See where it says it's missing and then see if you can trace up. One thing, if you define it inside like this, if you put it inside the if, that will not work because the scope doesn't work. So make sure you define it outside the if. That could be your problem as well. All right, we need to keep moving though to try to get at least the other data to print here. So probably what we want to do is pass an object with all of our properties instead. And then we can just let the component render this. So instead of putting all of this up there, we can actually put this in our, inside of our typography. And that way we can just, instead of doing this whole thing, we can conditionally set. So then we can just do this. So we can either display null or we can end up doing this and we pass in our weather data. And just let the component control how to render it. Does this, have I lost anyone? I don't want to lose anyone here. I know there's a lot of things about React that are probably new and confusing. Did you ever get the output working? Unexpected. So unexpected NF-JSON input. The other thing that could be is, did you get the extension and enable it? Because it could be the API isn't returning the data correctly. You have to fix your display. Okay. Well, we can take a minute and get things fixed. You see the city array in the console. Okay, which one? So here, let me try this again. Okay, whatever. So we're getting, so you get, first when you type new, do you get this array with the 5 cities? Okay, you get the, 6 array, however many, doesn't, then do you get this, did you try logging out the second time and getting this consolidated weather, this object with consolidated weather and other things in it? That should be your other thing. Errors before then. Okay. So do you grab your where on earth ID like this? And then you make sure you actually use the other URL. Blob.json seems to be the problem. Do you have blob.json in both spots? You need one after each fetch. Be my line 29. That's right. Well, does this console.log work? Like, if you get the first cities, then it didn't fail. If you get this list, okay, then that one worked. Do you have your second fetch, and then you have another blob.json right there? Because if the second one doesn't print out, then that's the one that fails. If you're actually getting the list of cities, then there's no way, it's not 29. Probably your problem is somewhere. I mean, because if you got that to log, then your problem is somewhere here. There's only 4 lines. Take a look at that and see if you can figure it out. Okay. Let me fix my own errors. Prop start weather data is undefined. What did I call it? Oh, I call it weather instead. Here, I'll take you back to there. Hopefully you can figure that out. All right. Okay, it's printing out. Hey, pretty good. We do have some problems in terms of, oh, I left the $signs in. All right, so if anyone's still here, we don't need these anymore inside of the, oh, I see what it did. So we're not in a template literal, we don't need the $signs, you just need the one to use it inside of a React component. And then the other thing we want is our line breaks. Remember how to do a line break in HTML? So add some line breaks so it'll break. And okay, there we go. Now it renders to the right thing. Oh, you know what it doesn't do though? It doesn't do our degrees. Okay. Has anyone been able to get this far? If not, we can kind of circle back and try to fix some more problems. Can you go back to display one more time? Yeah, you still having trouble with display? That's interesting. So here's the actual display component. Do you do return? That could be part of your problem. What you can try in your, oh, you just didn't finish typing it. Gotcha. Yeah, no, if you want to actually like grab like the final copy, I'll send the final copy of this code at the end so you can kind of see the whole thing all together. All right, you think it's all good now. Did whoever it was ever fix their error with the unexpected end of JSON input? That's definitely a fetching error. Nope. Okay. Well, hey, maybe after DM me on Discord at some point and I can help you try to figure it out. This API is also finicky, so it may just not be working for you. It's not impossible. Okay, so hopefully we've gotten, at least some of us have gotten far enough to sort of see this display. Error, props.weather is null. Okay, yes. So so it depends what you pass it in as here. So if this doesn't say weather, then you use props.whatever you put there in your component, whenever. So in the main, whenever you actually use the display component in your app, inside of your app function or app component, whatever you call the prop there is going to be what it's called inside of the prompt below. Stuff is printing out after it. Maybe it would have just, if you're getting that, I mean, maybe, I guess it's not impossible, but I don't know if it would have just kept working. Tough to say. Okay, so now we're able to sort of display the output there. And if we actually, so what should work now is if we look up something else, like let's say we look up Miami, it should, when we get that data back, it took a really long time that time, it should re-render, which it does. And that is nice. Okay, so what would also be nice is if we could render the whole week's data instead of just the one day. So I don't know about you, but this one, just seeing what the current weather is, not good enough. I think it'd be nice to be able to see the whole week. So if we want to see the whole week, what we need to do is just have a card for each particular day. So first we need to actually pull off the whole week instead of just grabbing the one day. So our issue is coming in here, right? We just grabbed this 0, which is our very first day. So let's grab the whole week's data. And so now this is actually going to be an array, right? So if we think about what's inside this, this is going to be an array with all of these max temps, min temps, and weather state name. So what we can do is, do people remember array.map? Remember, map lets us pass a function in to transform an array. So like if we had an array of 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then we called array.map, like a to a plus 2, then we would get back an array of 3, 4, 5, 6. It's a way to transform our data. Well, that's basically what we want to do here. We have an array of objects that we want to transform to use our own data format that has just these things in it. So take our weekly weather data, and then we're going to take a day's data. Yeah, .map's pretty great. If you're confused about sort of what .map does, you can always use a for loop. It should do basically the same thing. But we map over. Maybe it'd be better if I showed that, just so in case people are confused about that. But that's what I'll use the for loop. But if you know how to use .map, definitely you should. So we can use this for each loop. See, but then we need to make another array. Yeah, it's better just to do it the .map way. Sorry. All right, so we take our days of data. And remember, our day is going to be matching this weather data variable we had from before. So day dot max temp. And we're going to need that. Really, we can just do this and then replace all these with day. Your line 19 throws the JSON error. Okay. Well, okay, so, but are you getting to the point where, so you've clearly the first fetch, you're throwing JSON error and then 28 is putting out both New York and London. I guess you could just ignore it, because as long as the data is actually logging out correctly here, then it should be fine. But if you're getting the error, that means it's probably not logging out correctly. That's why I'm mystified how that could be possible. Because if you get an error on line 19, you should just be done. Unless it means line 19, is it like does this app function throw the error? Because that could mean it's something else causing the problem. And it could be anything in this function. Then it would make sense that it'd be able to print. Let me know. Okay, so we get our high, low, and weather state. Then blah, blah, JSON throws the error. Okay. Well, check your URLs then maybe. But see if it prints it out correctly. Yeah, I don't know why that's happening. If you you can check your browser version too. You can try making it into a non-arrow function. Maybe it just doesn't like arrow functions or something. But if it's throwing a JSON error, that's not the problem. So I don't know. We can debug after. I don't want to keep. I know other people want to sort of see the conclusion here. So then we can return our object with all of these things in it. All right. And so what this is going to do is it's going to take our whole array of data that we got from the API, and then it's going to convert it, do our to Fahrenheit, change the variable names to how we want them to be for our application. And then this return here, that's going to actually return back those objects. So now at this point, we're going to have an array of this data we get back here is going to be an array of data formatted how we want. And now we can put that inside of our set weather data. So now this is actually the set weather data, or this weather data is actually going to be an array. And so in our display, we have to compensate for this because now this is an array. So what we can actually do is we can do another map. Right? Because this weather property is now going to have a whole week's of data. So now we can map this. And what's cool is you can map straight to a component. So you can take this, you can take our props and our weather is going to be an array, and then we map over that. And for each day, which has all these properties on it, we can give back the right thing, this card with some typography in it. And we store that in output, and then we just return our output. And so let's take a look at, see, there's a good chance some of these things won't work. Let's try to run this and see if it works. Oh boy, objects are not valid as a React child. That's not good. If you meant to render a collection, she'll use an array instead. Oh, you know, it may just want us to do that instead, since we have an array already. All right, let's try that. I got data back, nothing rendered. Okay, well, we're closer. Let's see if we can figure out what the problem is. So, oh, yeah, okay. So we need to actually return this inside of here. That's at least one of the. Oh, there we go. Okay, do we see, does everyone see all these cards now? So now we have a whole week's worth of data. That's pretty nice. Okay, so yeah, so the problems, let me go back to the code so if anyone who's trying to follow along can sort of grab that. The main things that we changed were up here in our fetch. So before we were taking consolidated weather 0, right, to just grab the 1 days of weather, but now we want to have all the weather. So we grab all the data, and then now basically we do the same things we did before. We convert it to Fahrenheit, we pluck out the weather state name, but we need to do it for each item in the array. And so we can use .map, which, as people mentioned, is pretty great. And then we just store that into our weather data. And then on our display, we need to handle that we're actually getting an array in our prop instead. So go to here. And so we can also, what's cool is you can map over an array and produce components for each element in that array, and then just return that. And that's a perfectly fine thing to do. It's actually a very common pattern. Is to map over some data and then return an array, or map over some data and return an array of components. So we've got that. We could clean up the formatting though, so it looks sort of like our other one. So one thing we can do is our shadow on our cards is not great. So if you actually add a elevation, there's an elevation property. And I think I set, like, I think 5 is a good amount. I don't know. I'm trying to remember. But that makes the cards a little bit more, the shadows a little more defined. So you can also, like, if you set it to 0, I think, yeah, it doesn't even show the card. But if you set it to like 5, then you get kind of this nice shadow border. I don't know how well that comes across on the thing. Okay, the other thing we can do is try to render these in a row. In order to do that, because we have a lot of this wasted space out here. And so what we can actually do is if we box this up. So first, let's wrap this like this. So this is what the box, a box component is good for. If you put it inside of a box, it makes it easier to format. Box has a bunch of like formatting things inside of it you can use. And in this case, we're going to use this cool display inline block property. And if we set that, then it will compress them to like only the length they actually need. So then we can kind of get them all together. And then it kind of looks kind of janky that they're all up next to each other like this, right? So we can use our margin property. So margin 1, that looks good to me. Okay, pretty great. One thing we can do, okay, I think what we need to do is actually go in round so that these values aren't so long. So math.round is a good way to do that. These are just sort of small improvements, but hopefully this will make this. There we go. Okay. Does anyone want to see all the code for that? So this is kind of part of what the reusableness that React enables you to have. When you're able to use, because for example, if you're trying to do this in just vanilla HTML, right? There's no way to kind of, it's much more difficult. You can do it. It's much more difficult to sort of give an arbitrary number of, like, say we want to have a card for each different day of data we get back. Because like in this case, I think this API always returns like 6 days or something, or usually returns 6. But if you could return different numbers, right? That's something that becomes pretty difficult to handle when you're just doing vanilla JavaScript and you're not using some kind of framework. Whereas with this, you can kind of use the JavaScript concepts that you're hopefully already at least a little familiar with. Like you can use for loops, or you can use .map is a great one. And you can sort of use these, reuse these in React to display components. Like, if you're familiar with JavaScript, it makes it very easy to sort of think about how you lay your components out. Whereas if you're just trying to do this with vanilla, I mean, you can do it. It's a lot harder. This is still difficult, right? By no means can you learn React in one day, but it is a lot more doable. It's also very nice to read once you sort of get used to it, because you can see, okay, they have an array, they're going to map over it to make a bunch of cards, and then they're going to return that back. I'm going to go ahead and stop the workshop there. There's still, I'll probably stay after a little if there's anyone who wants to see some of the other features implemented. But I don't want to hold anyone. It is 9:30. That is kind of our official cutoff time. So are there any questions about anything? You're free to go if you want to. Otherwise, I'm going to stick around if there's anyone who wants to and try to add some of the other features that are in the original one. Or we can at least take a look at the one I built and see how you might start to implement some of these things. Props.weather.map is not a function. Okay, so that means that weather in your display, once it goes into display, Prop set weather. So that means what you passed in your display component, wherever that is. It could be a couple places, but if it's this weather equals weather data, that means weather data wasn't an array, which means that you probably, did you change this line? My guess is it's this line. Did you make sure that you actually set this to be the array and not just, your core problem is fundamentally that it's not an array, so you can't map over it, but it should be an array if you change these lines here. Okay. Oh, you wrapped it inside of another. Okay, yeah. Be careful. Yeah, if you do that, if you had it like that, yeah. Okay, there you go. Okay, so we have that. I assume I guess it looks like almost everyone wanted to stick around. Cool. We can try to see what else we can implement here. One thing I did to try to clean this up a little bit, to try to reduce the size of this map. So instead of making this display, I think what I called this weekly forecast because it was sort of the forecast for the whole week. So I'll change that. You can leave it as display or whatever, but you probably, like, using good names is very important. And then this map is kind of gigantic, right? So what we can do, well, first, one thing you can do is we don't need to really store this in a variable, right? This is actually a really common pattern all across JavaScript and JavaScript frameworks. Anytime, because we've seen this with anonymous functions, don't define a function if you're just going to use it once, right? So we don't need to define this output if we're just going to use it once. What you can actually do is take this and we can just put this inside here. That's one thing we can do. In fact, we can even join. I don't know. I think it looks better like that. So we can do that. And that's a little nicer. But the other thing we can do is we have a lot of stuff inside of our map. This probably should be extracted to another component. So if our weekly forecast is going to be each of these daily forecasts, because maybe somewhere else in our application, we want to be able to display just a single day, you know? That's what's nice about React is as long as you split your application into components, you can now have a weekly forecast made out of daily forecasts. And then somewhere else in your app, maybe you want to have just 1 day's, like maybe you in a corner, you always want to have the current location's daily forecast displayed, just no matter what. Then it'd be nice to have a daily forecast component displayed. That way you don't have to copy paste this whole thing. So let's make a daily forecast. So we're going to have our daily forecast be this, and then our return, we can just do we can just pass in our, I guess we don't really need the second half, right? We can just do it like this. And we can set our weather for the day to be that daily weather. And we just need to make sure we take that in here. Something else that's very common, and as I was giving this workshop, I kind of started to realize that there's a lot of syntax that React uses that's going to be unfamiliar. But instead of having this props object, you can actually destructure this. So do you remember how we can do? So one thing you can do that people used to do to peel off elements of things is to do this, right? So this is very similar to your array destructure. So you can, if you want to do, it's basically the same thing as doing this. So if you want to peel off an element of your object, just like with an array, you can peel it off with this dot. But if you want to peel off multiple, you can do something like this. So in this case, we only have weather, so it's only one, but you can do this. But even this people were like, oh, this is a lot of work. So you can actually destructure straight in your arguments. And so this is actually like the standard way to do it. And so now we're saying, okay, we're going to take in that props object and immediately destructure. We never even want to think about the props. And then you don't need to have props dot everywhere, which can be nice. You can do the same thing here. Destructure straight to weather. Don't need props anymore. Okay, we have a question. Why function weekly forecast instead of const weekly? You can do it the other way too. I just do it this way because a lot of people are more familiar with that style. But honestly, there's no reason why you can't do it this way either. If you want to write your functions like this, I think when I write things on my own, I mostly write it this way. Just because I feel like it's more readable for people who aren't as familiar with JavaScript. But if you like this, there actually are some advantages to doing it this way as well. So it's totally up to you. That works as well. There's actually a lot of debate in the JavaScript community about the right way to do it. And like basically it just comes down to if you work at a company or you're in an organization, if you guys are organized enough, you'll have a style guide, and your style guide will tell you which one is the right way. But there's arguments for both ways. It's just, whatever your style guide says. What's really important is making sure to keep it consistent. There are some nice things about arrow functions. I generally use them for short functions or .thens inside of these sort of higher order functions. I use them often. For components and for just general functions, I usually use the function keyword. But there are some, just go look it up. There's a whole debate over what the right way to do it is. And there's reasons both ways. Or if you just want to talk about, we can talk about this on Discord or something. Because I find it interesting why people argue what they argue for various things. But yeah, nothing to do with React. That's just a JavaScript thing. So I think this is a lot cleaner to do it this way, because now we have a daily forecast we can reuse, which is great. So if we want to just display a single forecast somewhere else, we can do that. We don't need to like extract it again. We have that separated out. And then our weekly forecast is just a mapping from our array into a bunch of daily forecasts. And there we go. Okay, everything still seems to work. Let's add what would be cool is if we add the picture, because that adds a real splash of color to the page. So if we actually go to our metaweather, the way the pictures are working, metaweather provides, this is why I like this API, because even though it has all these course problems, it provides these icons for your use. So if you actually go to the API docs, you can see, look, icons, and they're like, feel free to hot link these images. Replace X in the table below with the weather state abbreviation. And so what that is, in your weather state, remember those, in our data, there's actually an abbreviation. So if we look at take a look at our fetch data here. Okay. So if we take a look at our consolidated weather, let's take a look at our first day. One of the things, so there's our max temp, our min temp, and our weather state name, but there's also the weather state abbreviation. And it's not really that useful for most of the time, because like, why would you want an abbreviation when you can have the whole name? But that is how metaweather is storing these images. So if snow is SN, and if we want to get a link, all these images are available at a link. So if you want the SVG, we're going to use SVG. That's preferred. SVG is scalable, so it will look good in any resolution, which is amazing. Icons, PNGs, and these different PNG formats, they're all only going to be a fixed resolution. So if you like have a high resolution display, like a 4K display or something, then it might not scale as nicely. SVG is great. Okay, so we grab this, and this slash is sort of implied to be part of the metaweather. So let's add an image URL. And it's just going to be our metaweather, except instead of API, we're just going to grab static images. So that's where we can put this static. And then I'm just going to take this whole thing off because we're going to have to add that ourselves. And so now, inside of here, if we want to display inside of our content, let's put an image. And the way you use an image, if you remember from HTML, is source, and you just put the link. And so we're going to use our image URL. And then we're going to need that abbreviation. So what we're going to do is pass that in our weather prop. So right now, our weather prop is just this data. It has high temperature, low temperature, and weather state. But we're going to add that abbreviation here shortly. So here, I don't know, we'll put it under ABVR, say. And then we need to add that .svg to the end. Okay, so we have this. Great. And then if we go up to here, we can actually grab that abbreviation. I think it's weather state ABVR. And add that to our object here. And let's see if it worked. Failed to compile. Oh, typo. Okay, without the typo. No, it didn't link correctly. That's interesting. Oh, is it? Wait, do we need an API? Hold on. Let's take a look at this. Is it /API? I feel like it should just be /static/ image weather. Okay, is that what we have? Let's see. Static image, metaweather.com, static image weather, then that abbreviation, and then .svg, and it should be fine. Let's log out what that actually looks like here to see if it's doing the right thing. Okay, it seems to be the right. Oh, now it's working. What the heck? That's interesting. All right, well, now it works. I'm not sure what it was that I changed, but maybe it just didn't want to work that first time. Yeah, finicky API. I guess sometimes it doesn't work right. All right, there we have. Now, the one thing that bothers me is how it does this unevenly, which is kind of bad. So the way we can fix this is on our card or on our image, you can actually set. So here's your CSS. Okay, I don't like CSS. I don't like writing CSS, but you can write a style as an object. So what this is actually doing, the first set is your standard like React user variable. And then your inner one is an object literal. And that object literal you can use, because you know how CSS looks a lot like object literals in JavaScript? So you can just use an object literal set you want. So in this case, we want height to be, I think 180 pixels is what I found to be like a good amount. Yeah, and then you get a nice sort of standardized, if we sort of zoom this to, oh, well, it's a little bit too big. So I guess we can make it a little smaller, do like 160. No, maybe not. 140? There we go. Okay, 140. Now I get them all onto one line. You can also like, you can play other tricks with CSS to make it so that it will always fit correctly, but can you explain what real quick? Oh, yeah. So what you can do like a percentage. So that might be, in this case, we always have 6, right? So we can do height equals like what's one, it'd be like 16%, right? So if you do something like that, I don't know if that will do what we're actually trying to achieve though. No, not for this. But with CSS, there's a lot of things. So like you have a bunch of different measuring units. There's pixels, there's EM, which is like it's just another unit. It's like a bigger unit. There's like percentage, which is like the percentage of the space that you have. And so there is a way, I don't know it offhand, but there is a way to make it so like it always scales it to the right size that it matches. I wonder if you can do, nope, that doesn't work. Yeah, there is a way to do it. I just don't remember what it is. Oh, EM. Yeah, it's just another. You can always just Google. It's just a unit. I don't know. I'm not sure what it stands for, but it has, yeah, CSS. Wow, this website's horrible. It has EM. They recommend you use EM, PX, and %, but you can also use like centimeters and like inches and stuff. But they don't recommend you use those because I think pixels is actually not equal to pixels on the page. It's the pixels are different sizes depending on the display. And so it's supposed to make it look the same in all displays. I don't know. We're doing a CSS workshop next week. So hopefully Chris will be able to explain all these things better than I can. Because I am not too great at CSS. That's why I like this Material UI library. It gives you nice styled components that do all the things you want. Okay. I think the only other feature that there's a couple of like small things and like cleaning the code up that we didn't get to do. But the only other thing, okay, there's two things we didn't do. So the loading bar. Loading is actually really easy. So one of the problems with this application is when you type something and click it, remember how before we'd have that loading text pop up? This is actually pretty fast, but like if we can throttle the network to sort of show what it's going to look like. So let's say this person has like 2G connection, like a regular 2G connection, and it just might be really chugging, you know? So they're gonna load the app, right? It's gonna take a while for, wow, 2G is really slow. Okay, maybe not that slow. Maybe like 3G, because I don't wanna be here all day. I don't know, maybe 3G is too slow. But if they have a slow connection, when they click that, the fetch could take like a long time, which would be pretty bad. Yeah, wow, even 3G is slow. Okay, what about 4G? Like how slow can this get? Maybe it's just not going to load. I don't know, it's kind of concerning. Okay, wow. Well, that's not right. I feel like 4G is quicker than that, but yeah, you could do DSL. Well, this is, yeah, Chrome should have these options too. Like you can throttle to see what the experience is on different connections. I don't know how accurate that was, but you know what it could be is this isn't an optimized build because we're developing it, so it's probably bigger than it should be. Okay, but like if say we're on this 4G connection, which is not great, that was actually still pretty fast. But it could take a minute for that to load in. We should have some sort of feedback that something's happening. So luckily, you've got this awesome feedback section of Material UI, and one of the things I like the best about it is this. Look at this circular indeterminate, and it just spins around. You know, you probably recognize this from like Google Apps when you have no connection, and it just spins and spins and spins. But at least it makes you feel like something's happening. So you can just use this circular progress component. So let's grab that from our library. So grab our circular progress. And then what we want to do is as soon as we start fetching any data, so we need some way to track whether or not our app is loading data in or not. So we can make a loading variable or a loading set of state. And by default, remember what goes in use state here is the default. So by default, it's going to be false. We're not loading, right? But as soon as we start fetching, let's set that loading to true so that while we're waiting for it to show up, it will show that. And then as soon as we actually get the data, right down here, when we're ready to set this data, then let's set loading to false. And now what we can do is by default, let our output be that circular progress. And if we're not loading, so if not loading, and we have some weather data, then you set it to that. And now we should be able to get, oh, did I do it the wrong way? Let's see. Hold on. It should be circular progress. Oh, no, wait. No, we need to do this with, okay, we need two ifs. So if loading, yeah, if we're loading, then output equals circular progress. Else, if we have weather data, then make that. Okay, this should do what we want. Yeah, okay. And then we can type something in and we'll get this nice loading until it loads in. And there you go. That's very nice. And now if you type something else, like say we want to do like Philadelphia, we click it again, we get some loading, and then look, all renders. That's very nice. So that's one thing. And then the last feature is that we had that list. So, that's actually going to take some time to implement. Tell you what, I think I'm just going to cut it off here. And then if anyone else wants to, because this is already a very, very long workshop, longer than I thought it would be. So if anyone wants to see how that works, we can hop into Discord. So here, let me go grab the feedback form so people can fill out that. Let me stop recording.